spinning slow, blue and quiet, like it doesn't know what's coming. Above it, 17 ships, crescent-shaped, silent, hanging in orbit the way a predator holds still before it decides. 3 months, no signal, no warning, no explanation, just presence. The kind that makes 8 billion people hold their breath. Then a space station, humanity's answer, steel and glass and desperation dressed in diplomacy. Inside, a chamber cold enough to feel like a warning. Two delegations, facing each other across a distance no translator has ever crossed. And at the center, one man, not a soldier, not a diplomat, a linguist, hands shaking, pulse spiking, mouth opening to deliver the most important sentence in human history. He doesn't deliver it. What comes out instead will make him the most famous human alive, will nearly start a war, and will accidentally begin something no one on either side saw coming. I was dying, or something close to it. Something that tasted like copper and felt like drowning in a frequency the human body was never designed to hear. Dr. Callum Wren lay on the floor of a chamber made of light. His nose was bleeding. His vision had folded in half, and somewhere inside his skull, somewhere past the part that understood language and reason and the basic instinct to keep breathing, a voice was speaking, not to him, through him. Don't let go. Her voice, layered, immense, like a cathedral collapsing in slow motion. He tried to answer, but his mouth was gone. His body was gone. There was only the signal, the shared current. Two nervous systems tangled in a knot that physics had not approved. And underneath it all, like a heartbeat beneath a hurricane, a feeling, not his, not hers, theirs, hold on, don't black, and then nothing, which is not the same as death. Death has a shape, an end. Nothing is just absence, the space where a person used to be, before the universe decided whether to give them back. 1 week earlier, the station floated above Earth like a question no one wanted to answer. Meridian Station, humanity's newest and most expensive mistake, built in 14 months, designed for diplomacy, which was a generous word for what was actually happening, which was panic, dressed in formal wear. 3 months ago, the Varanthi fleet had appeared. No warning, no signal, no dramatic arrival through a wormhole or a tear in the sky. Just there. One morning, 17 crescent-shaped vessels, hanging in orbit, silent as held breath. The world did what the world does. It screamed. Then it strategized. Then it screamed again. Governments issued statements. Militaries repositioned satellites. Cable news ran 24-hour coverage of ships that did absolutely nothing. Social media exploded with theories. Alien invasion, alien tourism, alien real estate scouting. No one was laughing, but everyone was joking. Because that is what humans do when the thing they always feared finally shows up and just sits there. 3 months of silence. And then a signal. Not language, not sound, a biological pulse, a rhythmic electromagnetic pattern that carried no words but radiated meaning. The kind of meaning that crawled into your brainstem and said, "We are ready to talk." Every linguist on the planet got the call. Every cryptographer, every expert in nonverbal semiotics and cross-cultural communication. Callum Wren got the call at 2 in the morning, in his apartment, in his underwear, standing in front of an open refrigerator, eating cold pasta out of a container with a fork that had a bent tine. He was not the obvious choice. He was not anyone's first choice. He was, if he was being honest, probably the 17th choice. But choices 1 through 16 had either declined, frozen under pressure, or failed the biosignal calibration test. Callum hadn't failed. His neural pattern happened to sync with the Varanthi signal at a rate of 73.4%. The next closest candidate managed 41. So, humanity's first conversation with an alien civilization would be facilitated by a man who ate cold pasta at 2 a.m. and had once been described on a performance review as brilliant but conversationally hazardous. I had packed in 11 minutes, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, a toothbrush he wasn't sure was his, and a copy of a linguistic theory paper he'd been reading before everything went sideways, because apparently some part of his brain believed that academic literature would be useful during first contact. The shuttle ride took 4 hours. He spent the first hour staring out the window, the second throwing up, the third reading the mission brief, and the fourth staring out the window again, but differently, because now he could see the fleet. 17 crescents, arranged not in a line, not in a grid, in something more like a mandala, a pattern that suggested intention, aesthetics, a civilization that cared about how it looked while it waited to decide the fate of another species. Hy had arrived at Meridian Station, looking like a man who had been assembled in a hurry from spare parts. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair had given up. His face had the complexion of someone who had recently been reacquainted with every meal he'd eaten in the last 12 hours. And Ambassador Declan Hargrove had taken one look at him and sighed. Hargrove was 62. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from something that had survived a war. Because it had. 2 of them. Before he'd traded a military uniform for a diplomatic one, which he wore the same way, like armor. He stood in the briefing room, arms crossed, watching Callum fumble with his translation band. "You're the linguist." "Yes, sir." "You look like you slept in a dryer." "That is, not entirely inaccurate." Hargrove uncrossed his arms, then crossed them again. A man renegotiating his expectations in real time. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You walk in, you read the prepared statement. You do not improvise. You do not editorialize. You do not so much as clear your throat without diplomatic clearance. Are we clear?" Callum nodded. "Crystal." "Good." Hargrove turned toward the viewport. Earth rotated below, slow, oblivious. 17 ships up there. We don't know what they want. We don't know what they can do. We know they agreed to talk. That is the only card we hold. Don't fold it." "I won't." "You might." Hargrove looked at him, not unkindly, but without illusion. "You've never done anything like this." "Nobody has." A pause, then the faintest crack of a smile. "Fair point." The diplomatic chamber was enormous and cold, the kind of cold that felt intentional, like the room itself was withholding warmth until someone earned it. Callum stood at the human delegation's end. 7 officials, 3 military advisors, 2 cultural attaches, 1 linguist who couldn't feel his fingers. He adjusted the translation band. It didn't need adjusting. It translated 47 human languages and, theoretically, the harmonic biosignals of the Varanthi species. Theoretically. There's that word again, sitting there like a trap door. The prepared statement was loaded on his neural display. He had memorized it. He could recite it backward. He could probably recite it while falling from a building. None of that helped the fact that his pulse was hitting a number his doctor would not approve of. The chamber doors opened. No sound, which shouldn't have been possible. Doors that large, made of alloy that thick, should have made a sound, any sound, a hiss, a hum, a click. But they parted like water, like the station itself was holding its breath. And she entered, not floating, not glowing, not wreathed in dramatic light, like a movie alien designed to impress. There was no fanfare, no announcement, no choir of alien harmonics heralding her arrival. She simply walked, the way a river moves, without effort, without apology, and gravity seemed to politely step aside. Callum's first thought was, she's real, which was stupid. He knew she was real. He had seen the ships, read the briefs, studied the biosignals, but knowing something intellectually and seeing it walk through a door are 2 entirely different experiences. One is information. The other is the annihilation of every assumption you've ever held about being the only intelligent life in the universe. Queen Salith of the Varanthi. She was tall, taller than any human woman Callum had seen. Her form was familiar enough to make you comfortable, and different enough to make you realize comfort was a lie. Her ears, long, elegantly tapered, arching backward in smooth curves that caught the chamber light like polished ivory. They moved, subtly, expressively, like they were listening to frequencies that existed outside the range of human experience. Her mantle, a living layer of bioluminescent tissue draped across her shoulders and down her back, shifted in faint waves of color, Blue to silver, silver to something that didn't have a name in English. Behind her, 6 Varanthi advisors in symmetrical formation, eyes reflecting data that streamed invisibly through the air. Among them, one stood slightly apart, taller than the rest. His expression, if that word applied, carved from something colder than the room. Thalas, senior advisor. Callum had read the brief. Thalas had served Salith since her ascension, loyal, calculated, and reportedly unhappy about this meeting. The silence thickened. Callum stood when he was supposed to. That was good. He inhaled. Also good. He opened his mouth. "We welcome you." And then she looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. Her eyes were silver-layered, as if depth extended farther than space itself. He felt scanned, measured, politely dissected by something that understood him better than he understood himself. His brain, previously functional, performed a dramatic and total shutdown. And in the vacuum where diplomacy should have been, where the prepared statement should have launched like a well-rehearsed rocket, something else fired instead. From the deepest, dumbest, most catastrophically honest part of his nervous system. "Your breasts are so big." The translation band did not hesitate. It converted the sentence into flawless harmonic tones, projected them across the chamber, into the ears of every Varanthi present. The room did not breathe. Someone dropped a stylus. It clattered across the floor with the finality of a coffin lid slamming shut. "Oh no, oh no, 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 no." Callum's internal monologue broke into a sprint. A dead sprint. Through a field of burning wreckage. I did not just say that. I did not just say that. Except I did. I absolutely did. The translation band translated it. In perfect harmonic fidelity, which means she heard it. They all heard it. In high-definition alien audio, I am going to be vaporized. I am going to be studied as an example of primitive stupidity. There will be a plaque. Here stood Dr. Callum Wren, briefly. Ambassador Hargrove, beside him, made a small choking sound. That sound was Callum's career. Flatlining. The Varanthi delegation did not move. Thalas, the tall advisor, his expression shifted, just slightly, like a door closing. And the queen, she did not flinch, she did not blink. She stood perfectly still, and her ears, those long, expressive, listening ears, angled forward, just slightly. Her mantle shifted from cool indigo to a radiant gold that pulsed once, like a heartbeat, when she spoke. Her voice carried layered harmonics, as though multiple versions of her occupied the same syllable, deep and light, ancient and immediate. "You acknowledge the amplitude of my form." Callum considered feigning. It seemed more dignified than speaking again. I apologize," he managed. His voice sounded like it had been dragged behind a truck. "That was inappropriate, on Earth, extremely inappropriate, historically catastrophic. Actually," a faint ripple passed through the Varanthi delegation. The sound that followed was musical, chiming, almost like restrained laughter, translated into resonance, but not from Thalas. Thalas stood rigid, his gaze fixed on Callum with the warmth of deep space. Salith studied the human before her. This small, panicking, sweating creature who had just said the unsayable, and meant no harm by it. She could see that. She could read biosignals the way humans read faces, and his signals were screaming one thing: mortification. Pure, radiant mortification. On Varanthi, visible abundance signifies sovereign capacity. The translation band paused a fraction of a second, as if it too required emotional recalibration. "Sovereign capacity," Callum repeated, weakly, like a man being told the grenade he'd dropped was actually a party favor. "My physiology is engineered over generations. To sustain quantum biological strain, leadership requires a body capable of housing extended cognitive fields." She paused. "What you observe is not ornamentation, it is authority." He blinked several times, rapidly. "So, I didn't just insult you. You identified my supremacy. Somewhere behind him, Hargrove made a sound that was suspiciously, unmistakably, a suppressed laugh disguised as a cough. Callum swallowed. On my planet. Pointing that out would get me slapped. Your customs appear inefficient, she replied. Another wave of Varanthy amusement. Harmonic, musical, warm. The tension cracked. Not gone entirely, but no longer lethal. Callum dared to breathe, for the first time in what felt like 11 years. For the record, he said, I was trying to say you have a commanding presence. You succeeded. That's not how success usually feels. Her ears tilted, reading something in his face that no human technology could detect. You experienced shame. Profoundly fascinating. The word didn't sound mocking. It sounded analytical, genuinely curious, like she had just observed a species exhibit behavior that her predictive models hadn't accounted for. And Callum, standing in the ruins of the most important first impression in human history, felt something shift. Not the room, not the politics. Her, something in her, had opened, just a crack. The aftermath was controlled chaos. Hargrove pulled Callum into a side corridor within minutes. The ambassador's face was the color of a man who had survived a building collapse and was now being asked to fill out paperwork about it. What the hell was that? I panicked. You panicked. Yes, you panicked and told an alien queen that her breasts... I am aware of what I said. I was there. Unfortunately, Hargrove pressed both palms flat against the wall, breathed out, long, controlled. The breathing of a man who had diffused actual bombs and was applying the same technique to a social catastrophe. She's not angry, Callum said quickly. She actually, I know what she did. I was also there. Also, unfortunately. Hargrove straightened. She interpreted it as deference, a recognition of her biological authority. Yes, which means you accidentally performed a Varanthy power salute with your mouth. That is a generous interpretation. Hargrove stared at him for a long time, the stare of a man recalculating every life decision that had led to this moment. She wants you as primary liaison. Callum blinked. She what? You heard me. I heard you. I'm questioning my hearing. She made the request formally, through harmonic protocol, her exact words, translated. Hargrove pulled up his wristband display. Read. The one who speaks without calculation, he will remain. Callum leaned against the wall, then slid down it, slowly, until he was sitting on the floor of a space station, in a diplomatic corridor, after having possibly saved or doomed humanity. He wasn't sure which. Why? He whispered. Hargrove looked down at him, and for the first time, his expression softened, not into warmth, into something more rare. Honesty. Because I think she's testing us. Testing us. She didn't choose you because you were charming. She chose you because you surprised her. And I think she wants to see if that surprise is who we really are, or just a glitch. Callum stared at the ceiling. So I'm a test. You're an opportunity. Hargrove extended a hand, pulled him up. Don't waste it. And for the love of everything, read the prepared statements next time. Yes, sir. And Callum, sir, if you ever say anything like that again, I will personally launch you into the sun. Understood. He didn't sleep that night. The quarters were fine, standard station issue, small viewport, narrow bed, a desk that folded out of the wall like an afterthought. The kind of room that said, we acknowledge you are a person, without going so far as to say, we value your comfort. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Earth rotating below, 380 kilometers down. 8 billion people were going about their lives, eating dinner, watching screens, arguing about things that seemed enormous until you saw the planet from up here, where it looked fragile, thin-skinned, breakable. I thought about as a mother, down there somewhere, probably watching the news, probably worried. She had called when the shuttle launched. He hadn't picked up. Because what do you say, hey mom, going to space, might accidentally insult an alien queen. Love you. Which is almost exactly what happened. and somewhere above, 17 crescent ships, holding still. His wristband pinged. A message. Encrypted. Military channel. Report to Observation Bay C. 2300 hours. General Orlov. Callum read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might change the words into something less ominous. It didn't. General Kate Orlov was not a large man, which made him more dangerous, not less. He had the build of someone who had stopped growing outward decades ago and redirected all that energy inward, into precision, into control, into the kind of authority that didn't need volume. His hair was steel gray, cut close. His eyes were the color of a winter lake in a country where winter lasted 8 months. I was standing by the observation window when Callum arrived, hands behind his back, watching the Varanthe fleet with the focused stillness of a man studying a problem he intended to solve. Dr. Wren, he didn't turn. Sit down. There was one chair. Callum sat. You had an eventful day. That's one word for it. Now Orlov turned, slowly, the way a turret rotates. You've been appointed primary liaison. I have. That puts you in a unique position. I'm aware. I don't think you are. Orlov walked closer, not threatening, precise, every step measured. You're going to be in a room with her, alone, repeatedly. You'll see technology we've never seen, ship systems, communication arrays, maybe weapon specifications, maybe fleet deployment patterns. Callum felt it coming. The way you feel weather change before the rain hits. I need you to pay attention, Orlov said, and I need you to report what you see. Report to whom? To me. A pause, long enough to hear the station's ventilation system cycling air. General, I'm a linguist. I'm not an intelligence operative. Every person with access is an operative, whether they know it or not. Orlov sat on the edge of the desk, casual, almost friendly. That was worse. This isn't about espionage, Doctor. This is about preparedness. We don't know what they want. We don't know their capabilities. If those ships decide to stop being polite, we need to be ready. She came to talk, not to fight. Everyone comes to talk first. Orlov's voice was quiet, even. The voice of a man who had seen what happened after the talking stopped. I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I'm asking you to remember which species you belong to. And there it was, not a request, not really, dressed up in reason, wrapped in patriotism, but underneath, in order, from a man who did not accept no as a complete sentence. Callum's mouth went dry, again, for the second time today, which was becoming a pattern he did not enjoy. What if I say no? Orlov smiled, the smile of a chess player who had already seen the next 12 moves. Then you're a linguist with no security clearance, operating on a military station, with no protection, and a lot of people who are very, very nervous. He's not threatening me, Callum thought. He's just describing the landscape, and the landscape has no cover. I'll think about it, Callum said. Don't think too long. Orlov stood, straightened his jacket, walked toward the door, then stopped. Doctor. Sir. That thing you said to her today, it was stupid. A beat. But it worked. Don't waste that access, he left. Callum sat in the empty observation bay, alone. The viewport stretched floor to ceiling, earth below, fleet above, and the black between them. That impossible, incomprehensible black, where there was no air, no sound, no mercy, just physics, doing what physics does, not caring who lives, not caring who dies, just being. Orlov's words hung in the air like smoke. Remember which species you belong to, as if belonging were simple, as if loyalty were arithmetic. Add up the factors, subtract the doubt, arrive at the answer. But Callum had spent his entire career studying the spaces between languages, the places where meaning shifted depending on who was speaking and who was listening. And he knew, better than most, that which side are you on was never the real question. The real question was always, what are you willing to lose? He was caught, between a queen who wanted his honesty and a general who wanted his loyalty, between two species that hadn't decided yet whether they were going to be neighbors or enemies. And he was supposed to be the bridge. A bridge made of a man who said the worst possible thing at the worst possible moment, and somehow, impossibly, got a second chance. He found Hargrove in the officer's mess, late. The ambassador was drinking something that was technically coffee, and practically a war crime against the concept of flavor. Callum sat across from him, said nothing. For a full minute, the mess hall was empty except for them and the vending machine, which hummed with the quiet menace of a device that had no business charging $4 for something it called comfort beverage. Hargrove didn't push. That was the thing about Hargrove. The man had been a soldier. 2 wars, 3 decades of service. He had sat across from enough frightened young people to know when to talk and when to shut up. He understood silence. He understood that sometimes a person needed to sit with something heavy before they could figure out how to carry it. Orlov talked to me, Callum said finally. Hargrove didn't look surprised. What did he want? My eyes, my ears, everything I see in there with her. And you said, I said I'd think about it. Hargrove set down his cup, looked at Callum the way a father looks at a son who has just walked into traffic and survived. Not angry, just recalibrating. Listen to me, he said. I can't protect you from Orlov, not publicly. He outranks me in every way that matters on this station. Military has authority here. Diplomacy is a guest. That's reassuring. It's reality. Hargrove leaned forward. But I need you to understand something. What happened in that chamber today? That wasn't a mistake. It absolutely was a mistake. The words were a mistake. The result wasn't. Hargrove's voice dropped. She chose you, not the delegation, not me, you. And the reason she chose you is the reason Orlov wants to use you, because she opened a door, and everyone wants to see what's behind it. Callum stared at his hands, flat on the table, the hands of a linguist, not a spy, not a diplomat, not a soldier. What do I do, he asked, and Hargrove, the old soldier, the man who had spent 40 years learning that the hardest battles happen in rooms, not fields, gave him the only honest answer he had. Your job, just your job. Talk to her, listen to her, translate, build the bridge, and when someone asks you to burn it, you decide what kind of man you are. Callum sat with that. For a long time, the mess hall hummed around them, recycled air, recycled light, a vending machine in the corner that sold something called comfort beverage, which tasted like regret with sweetener. Hargrove. Yeah. Have you ever been the bridge? The ambassador picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it down. 3 times. Bosnia, twice in the Pacific Theater. Different wars, same job. He paused. The bridge always takes the most damage. From both sides. That's the cost. And is it worth it? Ask me when I'm dead. I'll have a better answer. But his eyes said something his mouth didn't. Something that looked like yes. Battered. Qualified. But yes. Night on a space station is artificial. A polite fiction maintained by dimmed lights and scheduled silence. But the body knows. It remembers sunrise and sunset, even when both are visible, every 90 minutes through a viewport. Callum couldn't sleep. He replayed it, over and over. The moment his mouth had betrayed him. The silence. The clatter of the dropped stylus. Her gold mantle pulsing. And then her voice. You acknowledge the amplitude of my form. She hadn't been angry. She hadn't been amused. She had been curious. That was the part he couldn't let go of. Not the embarrassment, not the career near death. The curiosity in her silver eyes, like she had met thousands of beings in her existence, and none of them had ever surprised her. Until a panicking linguist said the worst thing imaginable, and meant no harm, and she could tell. She could tell. That meant she could read him, better than any human, better than any lie detector, better than Orlov, better than Hargrove. She had looked at his biosignals and seen, not threat, not strategy, not agenda, just a man, terrified, honest, flawed. and she had found that. Interesting. He turned onto his side, faced the viewport, watched the Varanthi fleet hold position against the dark. 17 crescents, still as prayer. What did they want? What was behind those ships, behind that composure, behind those eyes? He thought about Salith standing in the chamber, the weight of her presence, not physical weight, something else. The kind of weight that comes from carrying something too big for too long and never showing the strain. He had seen that before, in people, in professors who kept departments together, in doctors who delivered bad news, in his own mother, who had raised 2 children alone and never once admitted she was tired, the weight of leadership, and the loneliness that came with it. Does anyone speak to you without calculation? The question formed in his mind. Unbidden, not for the speech, not for diplomacy, just a question. One human to one queen, across the impossible gap between species. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since arriving, slept. Morning, artificial, but functional. The lights came up. The station hummed, and Callum Wren looked at himself in the narrow bathroom mirror. Same face, same unremarkable brown hair that did what it wanted regardless of his opinions on the matter. Same jaw that couldn't decide if it was strong or just stubborn. Same eyes that his ex had once described as kind but slightly panicked at all times, which, at the time, had felt like an insult. And now, standing on a space station between 2 civilizations, felt like the most accurate description any human had ever produced. He splashed water on his face. Cold. The station's water recycling system made everything exactly 3 degrees colder than comfortable. A design choice that felt personal. This was the face that was going to negotiate with an alien queen. This unremarkable, slightly damp, chronically startled face. God help everyone. His wristband pinged. Schedule update. Day 1, Session 2. Secondary Exchange Chamber. 0900. Reduced delegation. Queen Salith. Dr. Wren. 2 advisors each. Reduced delegation. Just them. More or less. His heart rate climbed. The wristband noticed, and unhelpfully displayed it. Thanks, he muttered at his own wrist. Very supportive. He dressed. He didn't eat. His stomach had filed a formal protest and was not accepting submissions. He walked the corridor toward the secondary chamber, and with every step, felt the weight of it. Not dread, not exactly. Something stranger. Anticipation. Because despite the horror, despite Orlov's cold pressure, despite the fact that he had humiliated himself in front of 2 civilizations, she had looked at him and seen something worth keeping. The secondary chamber was smaller, quieter, a circular platform surrounded by adaptive interfaces that glowed with a soft blue light. No grandeur, no political theater, just a room designed for 2 people to sit across from each other and attempt the impossible. Understanding. The soft hum of cross-species encryption fields filled the space like white noise. No rows of watchful diplomats. No military advisors breathing down necks. No styluses waiting to be dropped at historically unfortunate moments. She was already there, standing at the center, her mantle shifting through contemplative shades of blue and silver. Not the blazing gold from the day before. Something quieter, more internal, like watching someone think in color. Her long ears angled slightly outward, attuned to more than sound, more than the hum of the station, more than the recycled air and the artificial gravity and the quiet desperation of a species trying to figure out if it was about to be saved or conquered. Behind her, 2 advisors, one of whom was Thalos, standing with the posture of a man who considered this meeting a waste of his considerable time. His mantle held steady at a pale silver, the Varanthi equivalent of crossed arms. When Salith sensed Callum enter, her ears tilted toward him, with deliberate focus. Dr. Wren, Your Majesty. He attempted a bow, respectful without looking like he'd dropped something. He mostly succeeded. I have reviewed your planetary data networks, she said. Oh no, you have become an icon. That is the worst sentence anyone has ever said to me. Her ears flicked back, briefly, amusement. Your species processes discomfort through humor. We process everything through humor. It's either that or screaming. Both appear efficient. He allowed himself a small smile, the first real one since boarding the station. I'm glad you requested a smaller meeting. This exchange requires fewer observers. She paused. Your previous statement has generated curiosity within my council. He winced. I was hoping we'd all collectively forget it. On the contrary, her mantle shifted warmer. It has opened a valuable discourse. Behind her, Thallus watched, his expression unreadable. But his posture, his angle, everything about him said, I am measuring you, and you are coming up short. Callum ignored him, or tried to. Salith gestured. A translucent field of light rose between them. Layered biological schematics, alien anatomical diagrams rotating in slow precision. Among my people, she said, leadership is determined by amplitude. Amplitude, he repeated, carefully. Genetic expression correlates with quantum biological conductivity. My body sustains a neural field capable of synchronizing with our fleet's living reactors. She turned the projection slightly. Visible abundance is a byproduct of this capacity. Callum studied the hologram, grateful for science. Science was safe. Science didn't trend on social media. So, he said slowly, you're essentially a bioorganic supercomputer with external indicators. That is reductive but not inaccurate. And I complimented your processing hardware. A beat, the faintest harmonic ripple from the advisors behind her. You acknowledged it. He exhaled, long. That sounds so much better in your language. Her mantle shimmered, gold again. Your embarrassment is disproportionate to the act. On Earth, commentary on physical traits, especially that specific trait, has centuries of unfortunate context. Explain. He hesitated, then dove. Power structures, objectification, social imbalance. Humans are complicated. I am aware. Your historical archives are turbulent. That's one word for it. She stepped closer to the projection. The chamber adjusted its gravity to her preference, almost imperceptibly. Callum felt the shift and compensated. Badly. You compensate poorly for gravitational fluctuation, she observed. I compensate poorly for most things. And then she asked the question, the one that changed everything, not the politics, not the alliance, the space between them. Your impulsive statement, was it driven by attraction? Callum choked on nothing, literally nothing. Air betrayed him. Direct as always, he managed. Precision reduces error. He ran a hand through his hair. It was driven by panic, and possibly mostly panic. Oh, she said it as though cataloging it, filing it in a system that organized the universe into patterns. You're the first extraterrestrial monarch humanity has ever met, he said. There was bound to be brain failure. She considered this, seriously, like brain failure was a legitimate subject of academic inquiry. Your neural scans during the event show elevated stress hormones and rapid cognitive fragmentation. He stopped. You scanned my brain, only peripherally. Of course. The conversation drifted, carefully, like two people crossing a frozen lake, testing each step. But something was building underneath. Not romance, not alliance. Something more rare. Recognition. Two people who carried weight they didn't show, meeting in a room between worlds, and slowly, carefully, telling the truth. Does anyone speak to you without calculation, he asked. And she went still. Not defensive, not surprised, just still, in the way that deep water goes still before it reveals what lives beneath. Phew, she said. The word fell like a stone. And Callum, who had no business being here, who had said the wrong thing and somehow stumbled into the right room, felt the weight of it, her loneliness. Not weakness, not self-pity, the structural isolation of being the most powerful person in every room you enter, of being revered and obeyed and never, not once, simply understood. Doesn't that get lonely, he asked. Her mantle dimmed, shifted toward violet. her ears lowered, not in weakness, in contemplation. Leadership isolates, she said. Reverence is not companionship. He nodded. Yeah, we're not so different there. You are not sovereign. No, but I've been the smartest person in a room before. It creates distance. She regarded him, not scanning, not measuring, simply seeing. You speak to me without fear now, she noted. I'm still terrified, he admitted. I'm just used to it. Another ripple of harmonic sound, her version of laughter. Soft, almost gentle. Behind them, Thalys watched, and his expression, for the first time, showed something. Not amusement, not curiosity, concern. Callum walked back to his quarters, head spinning, not from gravity. She had asked him to return tomorrow and the day after. Reduced sessions, ongoing. The council had approved. He was, against all odds and basic common sense, the primary human liaison with the Varanthi. His wristband pinged, a message from Orlov. 2 words, remember, report. He stared at it, then closed it, and stood at his viewport. Earth below, fleet above, a queen who saw through him, a general who wanted to use him, an ambassador who believed in him, and somewhere inside him, in the same spot where the panic had launched that terrible sentence, something new was forming, not confidence, not quite, purpose. For the first time in his life, someone had looked at his worst moment, and instead of turning away, leaned in. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Don't waste it, he whispered to himself. Below, earth turned. Above, the fleet held, and in between, a bridge was beginning, built from the most unlikely material in the universe. A mistake. Day 2. Callum woke to a notification he did not want to read. You are currently trending in 72 nations, the station's AI informed him. Cheerfully, because AIs had not yet learned that cheerfulness could be violence. That's not good, is it? It depends on your metric for humiliation. Please tell me none of it has been translated into Varanthi. There have been attempts. The semantic result is confused admiration. Wonderful. I've become interstellar fan fiction. He stared at the ceiling, counted to 10, made it to 4, got up. The mirror showed the same face, slightly more haunted, slightly less confident that faces were useful. He brushed his teeth, put on clean clothes, reminded himself that he had survived yesterday, which was a low bar, but still a bar. His wristband buzzed, session scheduled, 0900, secondary chamber, and below that, a second message, from Orlov, awaiting your first report. Callum deleted it, then undeleted it, because deleting a general's messages felt like the kind of decision that aged poorly. Then deleted it again, because some decisions are just worth the risk. She was waiting. Same chamber, same soft hum of encryption fields, same circular platform that felt less like a room and more like a stage. Except today, something was different. Her delegation was smaller. 2 advisors, not 6, and Thalys was absent. Callum noticed, immediately. The room felt lighter without him, like someone had opened a window in a house that had been sealed too long. Your senior advisor isn't joining us. Salith's ears angled, a micro-expression he was beginning to read. Backward tilt, dismissal, or deflection. Thalys has duties with the fleet. A non-answer, delivered with the precision of someone who had been giving non-answers for a very long time. Callum let it go. For now. So, he said, hands in his pockets, trying for casual, landing somewhere near nervous substitute teacher. What's on today's agenda? Your education. He blinked. My education. You are my liaison. You cannot translate what you do not understand. She gestured. The chamber responded. Holographic displays rose around them. Varanthi biosignal patterns, waveforms, chromatic spectrums tied to emotional states. I will teach you to read us. Read you, like, emotionally. Biologically, emotionally, structurally. She turned to face him fully. Your translation band converts words, But my people do not communicate primarily through words. We communicate through resonance, mantle color, ear position, bioelectric frequency. You are hearing our language, but you are deaf to our conversation. That landed. He looked at the displays, layers upon layers of data, color-coded, frequency mapped. It looked like someone had merged a symphony with a medical chart. This is going to take more than a day, he said. Yes. Or a week. Also yes. You're patient. I am efficient. Teaching you is faster than replacing you. He almost smiled. Almost. Glad I'm cost-effective. And so, it began. Days 2 through 4 blurred together. Not unpleasantly, but intensely. Like drinking from a fire hose that was also somehow beautiful. Seelith taught him to read mantle shifts. Gold meant engagement, satisfaction, authority confirmed. Blue meant contemplation, processing. Violet meant. She hesitated when explaining violet. Vulnerability or its proximity. Does your counsel see you in violet often? No. One word. But the mantle flickered. Just barely. A thread of purple through the blue. He didn't push. She taught him ear positions. Forward meant attention, interest. Lateral spread meant alert. Scanning. Backward tilt. Dismissal. Or discomfort. Downward angle. The hardest one. Meant something close to sadness, but deeper. A word that didn't translate. We call it Vethara, she said. The weight of carrying what others cannot see. Callum wrote it down. On paper. Actual paper. Because some words deserve more than a screen. We don't have a single word for that, he said. We just call it being tired, or tough, or fine. Fine appears in your cultural lexicon with alarming frequency. It's our most popular lie. Her ears tilted forward. You lie about your suffering. Constantly, professionally. It's practically a skill. This is inefficient. Welcome to humanity. On the third day of lessons, she showed him something that stopped him cold. A hologram of two Varantha, standing close, their mantles synchronized, pulsing in the same color, at the same frequency, like two instruments playing the same note. What is that, he asked. Connection, she said. When two Varanthi synchronize mantles, they are sharing emotional state. It is the deepest form of communication we have. It's beautiful. It is rare. She deactivated the hologram. I have not synchronized with anyone since before the evacuation. The weight of that sentence, the casual way she said it, like it was a fact, like mentioning the weather, like it didn't contain years of isolation compressed into a single admission. He didn't say anything. Sometimes the best response to someone's pain is silence that lets them know you heard it. She looked at him, and for a fraction of a second, her mantle flickered violet, before settling back to blue. He pretended not to notice. She pretended he hadn't. They both knew. I taught her too, not formally, not with holograms and data streams, just talking. She asked why humans laughed when they were hurt. He explained, badly, then better. That humor was armor. That sarcasm was a dialect of pain. That sometimes the funniest people in a room were the ones fighting hardest to stay in it. She asked about shame, not the concept. She understood the concept. She asked why humans chose to feel it, as though it were optional. It's not optional, he said. It's biological, social. When you violate a norm, your brain punishes you to keep you in the group. But you violated a norm, and the group did not reject you. The group wanted to reject me. You overruled them. She considered this. So I disrupted your social punishment cycle. You disrupted a lot of things. And she looked at him with those silver deep eyes, and her mantle shifted. Warm gold, not authority, something softer. Something he didn't have a translation for yet. He looked away first, because he was a linguist, and he knew. Some signals don't need translating, they just need time. Day 3. Dr. Maren Voss arrived on the morning shuttle. Callum heard the news from Hargrove, who delivered it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis that isn't fatal but isn't good either. They're sending a neurologist, Dr. Voss. She'll be joining your sessions. Joining why? Official reason. To study the cognitive effects of prolonged biosignal exposure on human neural patterns. And the unofficial reason, Hargrove's expression didn't change, which was itself the answer. She reports to Orlov's division. Callum's stomach dropped, slowly, like an elevator with a broken cable. She's a spy. She's a scientist, who is also required to file reports to military oversight. There's a difference. Is there, in theory? Callum leaned against the wall, pressed his palm against the cool metal, tried to think. Can I refuse her? No, she has clearance and a mandate. Great, wonderful, love having a chaperone. What's next? A body camera. Hargrove's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. Callum, listen, she may be useful. She may be genuine. Not everyone in a uniform is Orlov. But she's here because of Orlov. She's here because people are nervous. An alien queen chose a linguist over a general. That makes powerful people uncomfortable. Marin arrived at 1400. Callum met her at the docking corridor. And for a moment, just a moment, the tension dissolved because he knew her. They had been at Stanford together, different departments, but the same late-night library, the same terrible vending machine coffee, the same running joke about the campus squirrels being surveillance operatives, which, given current circumstances, felt less funny. She was tall, auburn hair pulled back in the kind of practical ponytail that said, I am here to work, not to be looked at. Sharp features, quick eyes, the kind of face that processed information the way a camera processes light, constantly, automatically. Callum Wren. She dropped her bag, smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that reached the eyes. The man who broke the internet and possibly intergalactic law. Marin, he exhaled. Something loosened in his chest. An old friend, in a place that had none. God, it's good to see a familiar face. I bet you look terrible. I'm in space negotiating with aliens after saying the worst thing anyone has ever said. So, Tuesday for you. He laughed, actually laughed, the first real one since arriving, and it felt like oxygen after a long time underwater. They walked the corridor together, catching up, Stanford gossip, career updates, the easy rhythm of two people who had once known each other well enough to be honest, and were now trying to remember how. She was brilliant. He had always known that. Her work on neuroplasticity had made waves, multiple publications, 2 fellowships, a reputation for precision that bordered on obsessive. They told me you synced with the Varanthi biosignal at 73%, she said. Lucky me. That's not luck. That's architecture. Your brain is doing something nobody else's can. I want to understand why. For science. For everything. They reached the observation lounge, sat down. She pulled out a tablet, already full of notes. Questions organized in color-coded hierarchies. Typical Marin. She once organized a study group by blood type. Nobody asked why. Nobody wanted to know. Tell me about the Queen, she said. What about her? Everything. What she looks like up close. How she moves. What her voice does to a room. The mantle changes. All of it. And Callum talked for 20 minutes, without stopping, about the sessions, about the colors, about the ears and what they meant, about the way Salith stood like gravity was optional, about the way she listened, not just to words, to the space around words, to the silence between sentences. And when he finished, Marin was looking at him with an expression he couldn't decode. What, he said? Nothing. She went back to her tablet. You're very observant. I'm a linguist. Sure. A pause. That's what that is. And there it was, a flicker. Something behind the eyes, not dishonest, just layered. The way a person looks when they're telling the truth and also holding something back. He almost asked, almost pushed. But Marin was his friend, his actual friend. From before the station, before the aliens, before the word that shook the stars. So he let it go. Mistake. Day 4. Marin joined the sessions. Salith regarded the new human with the kind of attentiveness that made Marin visibly uncomfortable. Which, Callum noted, was an accomplishment, because Marin was not easily shaken. Dr. Voss, Salith said, your neural patterns indicate elevated cortisol and curiosity in equal measure. Marin blinked. You can read that peripherally. Of course. Callum suppressed a smile. She does that. The sessions continued, but different now. Marin observed, took notes, asked questions that were always smart, always precise, and always, just slightly, pointed in a direction that had nothing to do with language. How does the neural field synchronize with the fleet? Marin asked. Salith's ears angled, lateral, alert. That is a military question. It's a neurological question. The mechanism interests me. A pause, the kind of pause that has architecture, load-bearing. The mechanism is sovereign, Salith said, quietly, final. Marin nodded, wrote something down, and Callum watched, and felt the first cold thread of something he didn't want to name. Because Marin wasn't just studying his brain, she was mapping the room. And across that room, Thalos had returned to the sessions, silent, watchful, but something in his posture had changed. Where before he had simply stood apart, now he leaned, just slightly, towards Salith, not deference, not obedience, something older, something protective. Like a man who had watched someone carry a weight for too long and was calculating how much longer she could last. When Salith's mantle dimmed at the end of the session, barely perceptible, a flicker of blue toward gray, Thalos noticed. His own mantle pulsed once, brief, a private frequency, like a question asked in a language only two people shared. Callum caught it, filed it, and said nothing. But it stayed with him. That pulse, not the cold advisor he expected, something else underneath. Day 5. Everything changed. It started small. A glitch in the translation system during the morning session between the full delegations. Callum was translating a Varanthi agricultural proposal. Standard stuff. Resource sharing agreements. Nothing inflammatory, except. The translation band stuttered. The Varanthi phrase for mutual cultivation came through the human speakers as territorial acquisition. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees, metaphorically, but it felt physical. A human general stood up. They're talking about taking our land. No, Callum started. That's what it said. The translation is wrong, but the damage was done. The human delegation was on its feet. The Varanthi advisors were emitting sharp harmonic tones. Defensive, aggressive, a frequency Callum had never heard before, and it vibrated in his chest like a warning siren. Thalos stepped forward, his mantle blazing a deep crimson. Your species hears what it wants to hear. The system malfunctioned, Callum was shouting now. Over the noise, over the panic. Salith raised one hand. Silence. Not gradual, not earned, not the kind of silence that settles after everyone runs out of things to shout. Immediate, total, absolute. As if sound itself obeyed her. As if the air in the room recognized her authority even when the people in it had forgotten. Every voice stopped. Every harmonic tone ceased. Even the station's background hum seemed to dim, as if Meridian itself had decided to pay attention. There will be a recess, she said, and the way she said it left no room for disagreement, or breathing, or anything except compliance. It was not a suggestion, it was not a request. It was the verbal equivalent of a door closing, with everyone already inside. Callum spent the next 3 hours in a maintenance bay, pulling apart the translation system's logs, line by line, signal by signal, and he found it. The error wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't degradation or interference or cosmic noise. It was surgical. Someone had introduced a microvariant into the harmonic conversion algorithm. Tiny, almost invisible, but enough to twist specific phrases, specific cultural concepts, into their opposite meaning. Mutual cultivation became territorial acquisition. Shared resource became claimed territory. Cultural exchange became cultural dominance. Every substitution designed to turn cooperation into threat. Callum stared at the data, his hands shaking, not from cold. I thought about the room earlier that day, the way the human general had stood up, the fear in his voice, real fear. Not he had genuinely believed the Varanthi were threatening to take Earth's land, because that's what the words said. And words, in the hands of the wrong person, could make war out of peace. Callum knew this. He was a linguist. He had studied propaganda, mistranslation as weapon, the way empires had justified conquest by misunderstanding the words of the people they were conquering. History was full of it, centuries of it. Oceans of blood spilled over sentences rearranged. And now someone was doing it again. In space between species. This was sabotage. Someone on this station was trying to make the Varanthi sound like invaders. He pulled the access logs, encrypted, layered, but not impenetrable, not to someone who understood the linguistic architecture of the system, because whoever had done this had modified the language engine, and that was Callum's territory. He traced the entry point through 3 proxy nodes, 2 encrypted tunnels, and into a terminal in the military sector of the station. His blood went cold. Orlov. But something else, a second signature, barely there, like a fingerprint wiped almost clean, a harmonic modification pattern that no human system could produce. Varanthi. 2 people, from opposite sides, both sabotaging the same system. Orlov wants the talks to fail so he can justify military action, and someone on their side wants the same thing, for different reasons. Callum sat in the maintenance bay, surrounded by holographic data, and felt the ground shift beneath him. Not the station, the world, the entire carefully constructed framework of us and them that everyone was clinging to, had cracks on both sides, and he was sitting in them. Day 6, the gravity core went critical, no warning, no buildup, just a calm announcement from the station AI in the middle of a session that made Callum's blood forget which direction to flow. Gravitational core instability detected. Margin of containment failure, 12%, and rising. 12% is not comforting, increasing to 14 across the chamber. Alarms shimmered in silent light. Human officials began talking over each other. On the far end, Salith stood perfectly still, her mantle already brightening as streams of data flowed between her and her fleet. "What's happening?" Callum asked. "Solar flare interference," the AI said. "The station's artificial gravity lattice is desynchronizing." Translation: if the lattice collapses, the station fragments. He stared at Earth through the viewport. Blue, beautiful, oblivious. "Of course it does." Salith's voice cut through the rising panic. Clean, precise, like a scalpel through noise. "Your core is insufficiently shielded against stellar variants." One of the engineers swallowed. "We didn't build it for this scale of traffic. You built it for yourselves." A pause. "Not for us." And there, in those 3 words, Callum heard something he hadn't expected. Not accusation, not judgment, not the cold superiority that Thalos wore like armor. Guilt. She blamed herself. The fleet's mass, the fleet's energy signature, the gravitational distortion of 17 crescent ships hovering in proximity to a station designed for human traffic. Not alien fleets. She had brought this weight. She had placed it on a structure that couldn't hold it, and now the structure was breaking. Because of her. Because she had needed help badly enough to risk asking for it. Callum recognized the expression, not on her face. Varanthi faces were too controlled for that. But in her mantle, a color he hadn't seen in the lessons. A shade between blue and nothing, like light being swallowed, the color of self-blame. She blamed herself for being here, for bringing her fleet, for the weight her presence placed on a station that was never designed to hold it. A holographic projection of the station's core ignited between them. Energy fluctuations spiked in violent patterns. "My fleet can stabilize the lattice," Salith said, "but synchronization requires direct neural interfacing." Callum looked at her. That sounds risky. It will strain my quantum field. How risky? She didn't answer immediately. The AI did, helpfully, terribly. Projected depletion of Her Majesty's bioelectric reserves. Significant. Human officials hesitated. Varanthi advisors murmured in harmonic undertones, and Callum felt the familiar rush of panic rising. But it didn't scatter him. Not this time. It sharpened him. You need to plug yourself into the station, he said. Yes, and let it feed off your amplitude. Her ears angled forward. Correct. Then do it, a human general snapped. We cannot allow— You can't allow what? Callum shot back. Her to save us. The room fell silent. I hadn't meant to say it like that. Hadn't meant the edge, the anger. But it came out, because he had spent 5 days watching both sides circle each other. Suspicious, calculated, afraid. And now the station was breaking, and the only person willing to risk herself to fix it was the one they were all afraid of. Salith regarded him, carefully, not surprised, but something close. Synchronization with foreign architecture increases instability risk, she said. So bring a variable, Callum said. Her gaze narrowed. Explain. You said my neural patterns are unpredictable, inefficient, spontaneous. Yes. Then let me interface too. If the feedback loop destabilizes, maybe human randomness will buffer it. A long pause. That is not a scientifically rigorous proposal, one of Salith's advisors said. No, Callum agreed. It's desperate. We're very good at desperate. Salith studied him, not as a subject, not as a diplomat. Something else. Something that didn't have a category yet. You would risk cognitive damage, she said. I already trend for the wrong reasons. Might as well upgrade the headline. A faint harmonic ripple escaped her, despite the crisis, despite everything. Very well. The core chamber was not designed for humans. The energy field pulsed in waves that Callum could feel in his teeth, his bones, the spaces between his thoughts. Gravitational vectors twisted in invisible arcs. The floor wasn't quite solid anymore, more of a suggestion. Still think this is a good idea, he asked. No, Salith said, but it is necessary. Story of humanity. She stepped into the nexus first. Light flared, her mantle blazed white gold. Her neural field expanded outward. Visible now, not as light, as pressure, as the sense that the air itself had become aware. The station systems responded instantly, stabilizing, slightly, like a patient whose heart had found a rhythm again, but faint, struggling. Callum followed, his wristband linked into the interface lattice. A surge of sensation hit him, and the world disappeared. Not the physical world, the human world, the one made of 5 senses and 3 dimensions, and a comfortable ignorance of everything beyond. He was inside her signal. Alien memories flooded through him, not as images, as knowing. Star maps embedded in instinct. Genetic echoes of civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth's sun had learned to burn. The weight of a neural field that touched 10,000 minds simultaneously and held them together like gravity holds planets. He staggered, nearly fell. Focus, her voice, inside his mind now, layered, immense, like standing inside a bell while it rings. I'm focusing. He thought back, mostly on not passing out. Their neural fields touched, human chaos colliding with alien precision. The station's oscillations began to smooth, erratic spikes dissolving into patterned waves. And then, he saw it. Not intentionally. She didn't share it. He fell into it, like stepping through a door that wasn't supposed to open. Her memory, a planet, green and gold, Athara, the homeworld. Callum didn't just see it. He felt it. The way you feel a place you've lived in, the temperature of the air, the specific quality of the light in late afternoon, the sound the wind made when it passed through the crystal spires of the capital city, Varanthi children running between structures that hummed with living data, elders whose mantles had faded to soft white, sitting in communal spaces, synchronized, content connected. Athara, with skies that sang in frequencies visible as color, vast oceans that pulsed with bioluminescent life, cities grown from crystal that responded to the emotional state of its inhabitants. A civilization that had measured time in harmonics, not years, not centuries, songs. Their history was a composition, and it was beautiful. And then, darkness. The planet dimming, the oceans going silent, the skies choking. Something was eating the world from the inside. Not an enemy, not a weapon, a failure. Biological. The very genetic infrastructure that made the Varanthi magnificent was collapsing, unraveling, like a code that had run too many times. Extinction, not as invasion, as erosion. I saw the evacuation, millions becoming thousands, thousands becoming hundreds. The fleet, 17 ships, all that remained, of a civilization that had once sung to stars. And he understood. They weren't here to conquer. They weren't here to trade. They were here because there was nowhere else to go. The Varanthi were refugees, and Selith, their queen, their sovereign, their living supercomputer, had brought them here, to a species that might help, or might destroy them, because the alternative was drifting, until the last ship went dark. He felt her strain then, not physical pain, the burden of holding too much. Fleet, people, legacy, hope, the terrible weight of being the one who decided. Every time, for everyone. You carry all of this alone, he thought. It is my function, she replied. That's not the same as it being fair. A pulse, faint, like surprise, as if fairness were a concept that had been filed away long ago. Under irrelevant. The core flared, threatening overload. Callum loosened instead of tightening. He let his thoughts go soft. He remembered Earth's oceans, bad coffee, the sound of laughter in a room where nobody was performing, the warm mess of being human. The feedback loop shifted. Alien precision anchored the structure. Human variance softened the extremes. The lattice steadied. Containment restored, the AI announced. Callum collapsed to one knee, breathing hard, nose bleeding, head full of things that shouldn't fit inside a human skull. Next time, he muttered, let's just exchange business cards. Selith withdrew from the nexus slowly. Her mantle faded from blinding gold to a softer glow. She remained standing, because of course she did. Queens don't kneel, but her ears were down. You saw, she said, not a question. Yes. That was not intended. I know. A silence, dense like the silence between a confession and a verdict. Your planet is gone, he said quietly, as gently as a sentence that heavy could be spoken. Your people are dying. Her mantle shifted to a shade he hadn't seen before. Not blue, not violet, something between, the color of a wound that had never been allowed to heal. We are not dying, she said. We are diminishing. There is a difference. Is there as dying as sudden, diminishing is, watching yourself become less, slowly, knowing, and being unable to stop. He stood up, slowly, wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand, and looked at her. Why didn't you tell us? Because your species responds to strength, not need. Her voice was steady, her mantle was not. If humanity knew we were weakened, you would not negotiate, you would dictate, and we cannot survive dictation. You don't know that? I have studied your archives, I know exactly that. And he couldn't argue, because she was right. Human history was a long, detailed, thoroughly documented record of what powerful groups did to vulnerable ones. She had read it, all of it, and drawn the only logical conclusion. Hide the wound, or they'll use it. I won't tell anyone, he said. You should. Your loyalty belongs to your species. My loyalty belongs to the truth. She looked at him, long, searching. Her ears shifted through 3 positions, none of which he could read. You are the strangest creature I have ever encountered, she said. I get that a lot. But truth, as it turns out, doesn't stay hidden on a space station. Day 7, Callum couldn't sleep. Again. He was getting used to the insomnia, less used to the alien memories that played behind his eyelids every time he closed them. Green and gold skies, dying oceans, the sound of a civilization going quiet. I went back to the maintenance bay, pulled up the sabotage data he'd found on day 5. He hadn't reported it yet, hadn't told Hargrove, hadn't told anyone, because the evidence pointed 2 directions, and both directions were dangerous. He ran the analysis again, traced the Varanthi harmonic signature, cross-referenced it with the biosignal patterns he'd been learning in sessions, and froze. The signature matched Thalys, of course, the senior advisor, the one who watched every session with cold precision, the one who was notably absent on the day the translation system glitched, the one who stood slightly apart from the delegation, not in loyalty, in distance. But then Callum paused and thought about the pulse he'd seen on day 4. Thalys leaning towards Salith, that private frequency, that protective angle, and he realized something uncomfortable. Thalys wasn't sabotaging the talks because he wanted war. I was sabotaging them because he wanted her safe. In his calculation, in his long and loyal arithmetic, alliance with humans meant exposure, vulnerability, risk, and the queen he had served since before she was a queen had already given too much. It didn't make it right, but it made it human, which was ironic, given that Thalys would rather be vaporized than compared to a human. And Orlov was sabotaging the talks from the other side. 2 people, on opposite sides, who had never met, never communicated, never conspired, but had arrived at the same conclusion independently. This alliance cannot be allowed. Thalys, because he believed seeking help from primitives was a degradation his species would not survive, because he could not watch his queen break. Orlov, because he believed the Varanthi were a threat, and the best defense was never letting them get comfortable. 2 fears, mirror images, both willing to destroy the bridge to protect what they thought mattered more. Callum gathered the data, compiled it, encrypted it on a personal drive. He needed to show Hargrove, needed to go public, needed to working late. He spun, Marin, standing in the doorway of the maintenance bay, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Research, he said, too quickly. She walked in, looked at the displays. She was a neuroscientist, but she could read data architecture. And the architecture on these screens was not neurological. That's translation system forensics, she said. Yes. Why are you analyzing the translation system at 2 in the morning? He hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2, but long enough. Marin, there's something you need to see. And he showed her, all of it, the sabotage, the dual signatures, Orlov, Thalys, the mirror conspiracy, the evidence that both sides had traitors, working independently toward the same catastrophe. Marin looked at the data for a long time, her face cycling through emotions the way a sky cycles through weather. Shock, then calculation, then something he couldn't name. This is explosive, she said. I know. If you release this, Orlov will be court-martialed. Thalys will be stripped of rank. Both delegations will fracture. I know. And it might save the alliance. That's the plan. She nodded, slowly, thoughtfully. Let me help you verify it. My neural mapping tools can authenticate the biosignal signatures. Give it forensic weight. Relief, warm, like sunlight through a cold window. Marin, thank you. She smiled, that same Stanford smile, the one he trusted. What are friends for? She came back 2 hours later, with security officers, and a restraining order signed by General Orlov. They took the data drive. They took his wristband. They took him by the arms, not roughly, but not gently. The way you handle something that has stopped being a person and become a problem. Callum stared at Marin, standing in the corridor, holding her own arms, shoulders tight, face pale, but resolute. The resolution of someone who had made a choice and was committed to surviving it. Why, he asked. She didn't answer, not immediately. She looked at the floor, then at him. Because he would have destroyed you anyway, she said. At least this way, you're alive. This way, I'm a traitor. This way, you're contained. There's a difference. Is there? She flinched. He saw it. The crack, tiny but real. Guilt, not enough to stop her, but enough to cost her something. I'm sorry, Callum. No, you're scared. That's not the same thing. They took him to a holding cell. Small, gray, one viewport, one bed, one light that never fully dimmed. The kind of light designed to remind you, at all hours, that you were observed, that privacy was a privilege, and privileges could be revoked. He sat on the bed, didn't move, didn't speak, just sat, and thought about the moment, the exact moment, when Marin's face had changed, in the maintenance bay, when he'd shown her the evidence, when her expression had cycled from shock to calculation. He thought the calculation was about the data, about how to verify it, how to make the case stronger. But it wasn't. The calculation was about him, about what to do with him, about the cost-benefit analysis of friendship versus survival. And survival had won. I didn't blame her. That was the worst part. He understood. Orlov was powerful. The military ran the station, and Marin was alone up here, with no protection except the protection of being useful to the right people. She had chosen to be useful, at his expense. He understood, and it still felt like being gutted with something dull. The charge: unauthorized access to classified military systems, possession of restricted intelligence, suspected collusion with a foreign power. Translation: treason. Hargrove came at midnight. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway, hands at his sides, looking at Callum through the transparent barrier. And his face, that old soldier's face, carved from survival and compromise, showed something Callum hadn't seen before. Grief. Not for himself, for the situation, for the way it had unfolded with the inevitability of a tragedy whose ending was written before the first page. I heard, Hargrove said. I had the evidence, both sides, sabotage. I believe you. Can you get me out? A pause, the kind that answers the question before the words do. Orlov has jurisdiction. This is a military station, and you accessed military systems without authorization, because those systems were being used to destroy the alliance. I know. Hargrove's voice dropped, low, honest, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years learning that being right and being free were different things. But belief doesn't beat politics, Callum. It never has. So I just sit here. You sit here, and you wait, and you trust that the truth has a longer lifespan than the lie. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. Hargrove pressed his palm against the barrier. Flat, open, the gesture of a man who couldn't reach through, but wanted you to know he would have. I'll do what I can, he said, quietly. Quietly won't be enough. Maybe not. Hargrove stepped back. But it's what I have. He left, and Callum sat, in a cell on a space station, between Earth and the stars, stripped of his wristband, his access, his freedom, his friend. I had the truth. He had seen it, in data, in memories, in the dying light of a planet that no longer existed. But the truth was in a cell, and the lies were walking free. He looked through the viewport, 17 Varanthi ships, holding position, silent as prayer, and somewhere on one of those ships, or in the diplomatic chamber, or standing alone with the weight of a dying civilization on her shoulders. Salith was making a decision. He couldn't hear her. His wristband was gone, his translation band, confiscated. The connection they had built, signal by signal, word by word, day by careful day, was severed. But he could still feel it, faint, like a frequency just beyond the edge of hearing, a resonance that didn't need technology to carry. The neural connection had left something behind, a thread, thin as spider silk, strong as cable, connecting him to a consciousness that existed on a scale he couldn't fully comprehend. She was still there, and he knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with science or logic or the rational processes of a brain trained in linguistics and semiotics. He knew the way you know that someone you love is in pain, not because they tell you, not because you see evidence, because the air between you changes, because absence has a texture, and loneliness has a frequency, and his frequency and hers had touched once, briefly, in a chamber made of light, and neither of them would ever be fully separate again. She was thinking about the same thing he was, whether the bridge they'd built could survive what was coming, or whether it had already burned. Day 8, the cell was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort. It presses, it sits on your chest, and waits for you to crack. Callum hadn't cracked, not yet, but the edges were getting thin. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes on the viewport, earth below, fleet above, and him in between, exactly where he'd always been. Except now there were locks on the doors. He hadn't eaten. Not because they didn't bring food, they did. Regulation meals, delivered by a guard who looked approximately 19 years old and absolutely terrified of making eye contact with a man accused of treason. I didn't eat because his stomach was full of something else. Memories, alien ones, still swimming behind his eyes, a green planet choking, oceans going silent, a queen standing in the wreckage of her world, choosing to fly. Those memories didn't belong to him, but they lived in him now. Uninvited guests that had rearranged the furniture and weren't leaving. His fingers tapped the floor. A rhythm, unconscious, and then he stopped. Because the rhythm wasn't human. It was harmonic, Varanthi, a pattern Salith had used during their sessions, a signal that meant, I am here, I am present, I am listening. He stared at his own hand, like it belonged to someone else. What's happening to me? The answer came, not from science, from Marin. She appeared at his cell door at 0600. No guard, no escort. Just her, standing in the corridor, looking like she hadn't slept, looking like sleep had filed a restraining order against her conscience. Callum didn't stand, didn't look up, just spoke. Come to check on your investment. Callum, or did Orlov send you for one more data point? She flinched. Good. He wanted her to flinch. He wanted something in this station to respond to reality instead of strategy. I came because the station is falling apart. He looked up. Her face confirmed it. Not metaphor, literal. The gravity core is destabilizing again, she said. Worse than before. The first repair was temporary. The solar interference is intensifying. So have the Queen stabilize it again. She can't. Marin's voice dropped. Not alone. The first synchronization depleted her reserves more than anyone expected. She's weakened. The fleet is drifting out of alignment. And Thalys... She stopped. What about Thalys? He's making a move. The Varanthi delegation is fracturing. Half the advisors want to withdraw from the station entirely. Thalys is arguing that humans are too dangerous, too unstable, that the alliance is a trap. Callum stood now, slowly, the way you stand when the ground isn't trustworthy. And Orlov is positioning military assets around the fleet. Defensive posture, officially, but nobody points guns defensively. No. They looked at each other, through the transparent barrier. Two people who had been friends, then not, and now stood in the ruins of what trust used to look like. Why are you here, Marin, the real reason? She closed her eyes, opened them, and when she spoke, her voice was stripped. No layers, no calculation. Just a woman standing at the edge of a mistake too large to walk back from. Because I did the wrong thing, and the wrong thing is about to kill everyone on this station. She told him, standing in that corridor, at 6 in the morning, on a space station that was slowly shaking itself apart. She told him that Orlov hadn't just wanted surveillance. He'd wanted leverage, neural data from Callum's sessions, proof that the Varanthi biosignal could influence human cognition, evidence that could be framed as mind control, as a weapon, as justification for a preemptive military response. He was going to use my brain scans to start a war, Callum said. I was going to use your brain scans to justify one. There's a difference. You keep saying that. There's a difference. There's a difference. His voice cracked, not from anger, from exhaustion, from the weight of being betrayed by someone who kept explaining the betrayal as if explanation were the same as absolution. At what point does the difference stop mattering? She didn't answer. You gave him everything. Not everything. She pulled something from her jacket, small, Flat. A data chip. I copied the sabotage evidence before they confiscated it. Both signatures, Orlov's, Thallas's, forensically verified. He stared at the chip, then at her. Why? Because. She stopped. Started again. Because you were my friend. Before any of this. And because my mother didn't raise me to be this person. And I don't want to die on a space station knowing I helped it happen. A beat. Your mother would be very disappointed. My mother would have slapped me into next week. Something cracked. Between them. Not the barrier. The ice. Can you get me out? He asked. She held up a security badge. Not hers, borrowed or stolen. The distinction felt academic at this point. Already planned. You planned a prison break. I planned a correction. That's the most academic way anyone has ever described a felony. She swiped the badge. The barrier dissolved. Callum stepped out, free, or something shaped like it. Where, he said. The diplomatic chamber. It's the only place with full broadcast capability. If we get to the central platform, we can transmit to both delegations simultaneously. You think I'm letting you do this alone? He looked at her, this woman who had betrayed him, who was now committing treason to fix it, who was shaking, just slightly, in a way that most people wouldn't notice. But Callum noticed, because he had spent 5 days learning to read the things people hide behind the things they show. Marin, yeah, we're going to talk about this later. If there is a later, there will be. I wasn't sure, but he said it anyway. Because sometimes hope is a decision you make before the evidence arrives. They move fast, through corridors that were supposed to be secured, past checkpoints that Marin's stolen badge opened like keys to a house that didn't know it had been robbed. The lighting in the corridors had shifted to amber, emergency mode. Everything bathed in a warm glow that would have been beautiful if it didn't mean the station was dying. They passed a crew quarters section, doors sealed, people inside. Callum could hear voices, scared voices, calm voices pretending to be brave. A woman telling her children that everything was going to be fine, using humanity's most popular lie. Marin ran ahead, checked corners, waved him forward, the neurologist who had memorized the station's layout in case of exactly this scenario. Because that's what scientists do when they're scared. They prepare. They study the exits. The station shuddered around them, subtle, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something dying. Callum felt it, not just physically, in his skull. That new place, the one the neural connection had opened, where Varanthi frequencies lived alongside human thoughts. He could feel the gravitational lattice straining, feel the fleet above, 17 ships, drifting, losing alignment, and beneath it all, beneath the physics and the politics and the architecture of a station coming apart. He could feel her, Salith, faint, like a signal from very far away, but unmistakable, a presence, a resonance, the neural equivalent of someone standing in a dark room, and you can't see them, but you know they're there. She's weakened, he thought, but she's still holding. Barely. The diplomatic chamber was occupied. Both delegations, full assembly, human and Varanthi, facing each other across the circular platform. The air between them vibrating with tension so thick it had texture. Salith stood at the Varanthi end. Her mantle was dim, muted, blues and grays that Callum had never seen on her. The colors of depletion, of a system running on reserves it didn't have. Behind her, Thallas, standing close, closer than before, his mantle bright, crimson and silver, the colors of authority being claimed, not earned, but his eyes. Those were not the eyes of an usurper. They were the eyes of a man watching someone he had protected his entire life stand at the edge of something he could not protect her from. On the human side, Orlov, center position, uniform pressed, expression steady, the perfect image of military composure, flanked by officers who had replaced the diplomatic attaches. Because this wasn't diplomacy anymore. This was positioning. Hargrove stood off to one side, not sidelined, but not center either. The old ambassador watching the situation he had spent his career trying to prevent. unfolding in real time. Callum and Marin entered through the service corridor. Side door, no announcement. It took 4 seconds for everyone to notice. Orlov first. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. That cold lake stare sharpening into something predatory. Dr. Wren is supposed to be in custody. Dr. Wren has evidence that this assembly needs to hear, Marin said, standing beside Callum. Chin up, voice level, the posture of someone who has already calculated the cost and decided to pay it. Dr. Voss, you are committing a serious breach of General, respectfully. The station is falling apart, literally. I think protocol can wait. Orlov took a step forward. 2 guards moved with him. Trained, synchronized. The choreography of force. And then, let him speak, Salith's voice. Quiet, but it filled the room, the way a single note can fill a cathedral, not through volume, through certainty. Thalos turned to her, sharp. My queen, this human was confined for... I said let him speak. Her mantle flickered. For one moment, just one. Gold, not bright, not blazing, but there. Like embers in a fire everyone thought was dead. Thalos went still, not obedient, calculating. Callum could see it. The advisor was weighing, measuring, deciding whether this was the moment to push. Not yet. The answer in his posture said not yet. Callum stepped onto the platform, alone, in front of 2 species that couldn't decide if they wanted to save each other or destroy each other. A linguist, with no wristband, no translation ban, no protection, just the truth, and a data chip. 3 days ago, he said, someone sabotaged the translation system on this station. Silence, the kind that compresses air. The sabotage was designed to make Varanthi diplomatic language sound like threats. Mutual cultivation was translated as territorial acquisition. Cultural exchange became cultural dominance. Every substitution engineered to make cooperation sound like invasion. He paused. Let it land. I traced the sabotage to 2 sources, one human, one Varanthi. The room shifted, not physically, atmospherically, like the pressure change before a storm. The human source leads to a terminal in the military sector of this station, under the access code of General Cade Orlov. Orlov did not move, did not blink. His composure was perfect. The composure of a man who had prepared for this accusation the way he prepared for everything, with contingencies. The Varanthi source carries the biosignal signature of Senior Advisor Thalos. Now the storm broke. Thalos erupted, his mantle blazing full crimson, harmonic tones pouring from him at a frequency that made the human delegates physically recoil. Not words, not yet. Emotion, raw, weaponized. The Varanthi equivalent of screaming. The human officers reached for sidearms. The Varanthi advisors closed ranks. And Callum stood in the middle, in the eye, in the exact space where 2 civilizations were about to tear each other apart. Stop! Not Callum's voice, not Salith's, Hargrove. The old ambassador stepped forward, into the gap, between the guns and the harmonics, between the fear and the fury. A 62-year-old man in a diplomatic suit, with no weapon, no leverage, no army, no fleet, nothing but himself, and the authority of someone who had spent 40 years walking into rooms exactly like this one, where the air tasted like the last minute before everything went wrong. I had done this in Sarajevo, done it in Jakarta, done it in rooms that history had forgotten because the crisis had been averted, because someone had stepped into the gap and said the thing that needed saying, at the moment it needed to be said. Everyone, stand down. And something in his voice, something you can't fake, something that isn't trained or rehearsed or calculated, something that only exists in people who have stood at the edge enough times to know what falling looks like, and have decided, every time, to stay standing, made people listen. The officers lowered their hands. The Varanthi harmonics softened. The room didn't relax, but it stopped accelerating. Hargrove turned to Orlov. General, is this true? The doctor accessed classified systems without authorization. His evidence is compromised. I'm not asking about procedure. I'm asking if it's true. A silence, the kind that has a body count. Orlov's jaw tightened. I took precautionary measures to protect human interests. You sabotaged a peace process. I ensured we had options. Hargrove stared at him. Long, steady, the way a man stares at something he once respected, and now must choose to confront. There are no options if the station is destroyed. Sit down, General. Orlov didn't sit, but he stopped talking, which was close enough. Hargrove turned to the Varanthi delegation, to Thalys, who stood rigid, mantle still crimson, eyes fixed on Callum with a hatred so refined it felt like architecture. Salith spoke. Thalys, is this accurate? I acted to preserve our species. You acted to sabotage an alliance that could save us. An alliance with primitives, who confine those who speak truth, who point weapons at those who offer help. These creatures cannot be trusted, and deception makes us worthy of trust. Thalys turned to her fully, and in his eyes, in the set of his mantle, in the angle of his ears, Callum read something he hadn't expected. Pain, not calculation, not ambition. Pain. I have served you since your ascension, Thalys said, and his voice, for the first time, was not cold, it was broken. I have watched you carry us, alone. I have watched you weaken, for them. And I will not stand by while you diminish yourself for a species that does not deserve your sacrifice. The chamber was silent. Salith looked at Thalys, her most loyal advisor, her oldest ally, the one who had stood beside her through the death of a planet, and she saw what Callum saw. A man who loved his queen and had twisted that love into betrayal because he couldn't bear to watch her break. Thalys, she said softly, I am not diminishing. I am choosing. And then she did the thing no one expected. She turned to face both delegations, human and Varanthi, the entire room, every eye, every sensor, every fear, focused on her, and she told the truth. Our home world is dead. The words fell like stones into still water. Iathera is gone. The Varanthi are not an empire. We are a remnant. 17 ships, 43,000 individuals. All that remains of a civilization that once spanned a star system. Her mantle shifted. Not to gold, not to blue, to that nameless color between violet and gray, the color of a wound exposed to air. We came to this system because we had nowhere else to go. I chose Earth because your species, despite its chaos, despite its violence, despite its alarming tendency to say inappropriate things at critical moments. A flicker, the ghost of warmth, directed at Callum. Your species survives, relentlessly, irrationally, against every logical prediction. And I believed, perhaps irrationally, that a species which survives through chaos might understand what it means to stand at the edge of extinction and choose to help. She paused. I was wrong to hide this. She paused, and the pause was not for effect. It was for breath, for the gathering of something that had been held too tightly for too long. I feared your weakness would become our weapon, that if you knew we were vulnerable, you would exploit it, as your history suggested you would. She turned to Orlov, and I was partially correct, then to Callum, but partially wrong, then to Hargrove, because some of you, against all probability, chose truth over advantage. She let the silence do its work. Let it sit in the room like a living thing. Let every person, human and Varanthi, feel the weight of what had just been said, not the political implications, not the strategic recalibration, the human weight of it, the weight of a leader standing in front of the people she was supposed to be strong for, and saying, I am not strong enough alone. That is the hardest sentence any leader will ever speak, in any language, on any world. She straightened, and though her mantle was dim, and her reserves depleted, and her body visibly weakened from the strain of holding a dying fleet together, she was, in that moment, more powerful than Callum had ever seen her. I am asking, she said, not as a sovereign, not as an ally, Not as a strategic partner. I am asking as the last guardian of a dying people. Help us, or we will drift, and eventually, we will end. The room held its breath. Thala stared at her, mantle fading, from crimson to something pale, the color of a man watching his queen do the one thing he'd spent his life trying to prevent, and realizing she was right. On the human side, officers looked at each other, at Orlov, at Hargrove, the calculations shifting, not because the politics had changed, but because something older than politics had entered the room. Honesty, the simple, devastating, unbearable honesty of someone who has nothing left to hide. And then the station shook. Not subtly, not gently, the kind of shudder that travels through metal and bone simultaneously. The lights flickered, the gravity wavered, and the AI's voice, still calm, still helpful, still the most inappropriately cheerful entity in the universe, announced, core containment failure imminent. Estimated structural integrity, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Not enough time for politics. Not enough for debate. Not enough for the careful, measured, calculated dance of diplomacy. Enough time for action or ending. Callum moved first. He didn't ask permission, didn't look at Orlov, didn't wait for clearance. He crossed the chamber to Salith, standing in front of her, close enough to feel the fading warmth of her mantle, close enough to see the exhaustion she had hidden from everyone. One more time, he said, the neural connection will be more dangerous. My reserves, I know. You could suffer permanent cognitive damage. I know. You could die. I know. She looked at him, those silver eyes, dim now, not from weakness, from honesty, from the relief and terror of having finally let the mask fall. Why, she asked, and he almost said something smart, almost said something brave, almost reached for the kind of line that people say in movies, when the music swells and the camera finds the perfect angle. But he was Callum Wren, and he didn't do perfect angles. Because you asked for help, he said, and I heard you. Simple, small, ordinary. Not the kind of thing that gets carved into monuments. Not the kind of line that makes it into history books or diplomatic archives or the opening crawl of a documentary about first contact. Just one person telling another person, I heard you. And for a queen who had spent her entire life broadcasting signals that no one ever fully received, who had carried a dying civilization on a body engineered for the weight but never designed for the loneliness, who had asked for help the only way she knew how, which was to pretend she didn't need it. Enough. They entered the core chamber together. The energy field was catastrophic now, not pulsing, convulsing, gravitational vectors spiraling in patterns that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The floor buckled. The walls hummed at frequencies that made Callum's vision blur. Marin had set up a broadcast relay, linked to every communication channel on the station, human and Varanthi. Whatever happened in this chamber, both sides would witness. Salith stepped into the nexus. Her mantle blazed, not white gold this time, barely gold at all, a pale amber, strained, flickering, like a candle in a hurricane. Her neural field expanded, touched the station's systems, and held, barely. Callum followed, linked in, and the universe split open again. But different this time, deeper, wider, because she was weaker, and her defenses were down, and the connection wasn't a controlled bridge anymore. It was a flood. Her memories, not fragments, everything. He saw her ascension, young, barely past what humans would call adolescence, standing in a chamber of light on Athara as the neural field of an entire civilization was transferred into her body. The weight of it, crushing, immense, the sound she made that no one was allowed to hear. The sound of a girl becoming a sovereign and losing the right to be anything else. I saw her predecessors, queens who had carried the field before her, brilliant, powerful, and ultimately consumed, burned out by the very capacity that made them queens. Lives shortened, identities dissolved, into function, into service, into amplitude. Hai saw the moment she learned Ithara was dying, standing in a chamber not unlike this one, receiving data that said, your world has 17 years, and then nothing. And she had told no one. For 6 of those years, carrying the countdown alone, while she built the fleet, while she engineered the evacuation, while she held the neural field steady for a civilization that didn't know it was already falling. 6 years. You carried it for 6 years, alone. Someone should have told you that you didn't have to. And then, something happened that had never happened in a neural link. She saw him, not his surface, not his neural patterns, not the biosignal data she had been reading peripherally since day one. She saw him, the boy who grew up in a house where silence meant anger, who learned to speak first and think second because the alternative was disappearing, who became a linguist not because he loved language, but because he was desperate to understand what people really meant. Behind the words, beneath the surface, in the spaces where truth hid from polite conversation, she saw his loneliness, different from hers, not the isolation of power, the isolation of never being quite right, never fitting the shape the world wanted him to be, too smart for comfortable, too awkward for charming, too honest for safe, and she recognized it, not as data, not as cultural observation, as kinship. You carry weight too, she thought. Not like yours. Weight is weight. The shape doesn't matter, only the carrying. The core flared, violent, hungry, pulling at both of them like a current trying to drag them under. Callum did what he had done before. Let go. Let the chaos in. The warmth, the mess, the beautiful wreckage of being human. Memories of laughter in small rooms, of bad coffee shared with Marin at 2 a.m. before everything went wrong, of Hargrove's hand pressed flat against the barrier, open, reaching for what he couldn't touch. He poured it in, all of it, not precision, not strategy, just life, unfiltered, unedited, unashamed, the smell of grass after rain, his daughter's laugh. Wait, he didn't have a daughter. That was her memory, bleeding into his, a child on Athara, running through crystal corridors, laughing at frequencies that made the walls sing. Her child, no. Her memory of being a child, before the field, before the crown, before the weight. She had been small once, scared once, human in every way that mattered, except species, and he sent her his. The apartment at 2 a.m., cold pasta, bent fork, the absurd piece of standing in refrigerator light when the world is asleep. His mother humming in the kitchen, off-key, always off-key, and always the most comforting sound in the universe. And her field, alien, ancient, precise, wrapped around it, not correcting, not refining, harmonizing, the way a melody harmonizes with a rhythm. 2 different patterns, creating something neither could create alone. The station's oscillation smoothed, the gravitational lattice steadied, the energy field dimmed from catastrophic to stable, from stable to contained, but they didn't stop, because something was forming in the connection, something unplanned, a signal, not from the station, not from the fleet, from them, from the place where human chaos met Varanthi precision. A new frequency, never before transmitted. It broadcast through Marin's relay, into every speaker, every harmonic receiver, every communication channel on the station and the fleet beyond. Not words, not commands, not threats or promises or diplomatic language. A sound, a frequency that human ears heard as warmth and Varanthi sensors read as trust. A signal that didn't translate because it didn't need to. It bypassed language entirely. It spoke to the part of every being, human and Varanthi, that understood, without being told, what it felt like to need help and to offer it. On the station's bridge, officers lowered their weapons, not because they were ordered to, not because protocol changed, not because someone with more stars on their collar said stand down, because their hands decided, because something in the signal reached past the training, past the fear, past the uniforms and the ranks and the carefully maintained walls between us and them, and found the part that remembered what it was like to be a child, afraid of the dark, and to hear a voice say, "You are not alone." In the Varanthi fleet, ships that had been drifting out of alignment, slowly, gently, turned back toward the station, not commanded, not ordered by their queen's neural field, choosing, the way a person chooses to stay in a room when they could leave, the way a hand reaches out when it could pull back, the way trust begins, not with certainty, with a decision made before the evidence is complete. In the diplomatic chamber, Thales, standing alone, his mantle shifting through colors that had no names, heard the signal, and something in his face, that rigid, loyal, broken face, loosened, not forgiveness, not surrender, recognition that the thing he feared most had become the thing that might save them. Orlov stood at the viewport, watching his military positioning become irrelevant, not because he had been defeated, but because the situation had evolved past the need for what he offered. And on his face, not anger, not humiliation, the quiet devastation of a man whose weapons were no longer the answer, and who did not yet know what was. And Hargrove, the old soldier, stood in the middle of it all, eyes wet, quiet, the way old soldiers get when the war they spent their life preparing for doesn't happen. Containment fully restored, the AI announced. Core stable, gravitational lattice nominal. Also, Dr. Wren, your heart rate is concerning. Thanks, he whispered. To no one, to everyone. Very helpful. The disconnection was slow, careful, like untangling two threads that had woven together so tightly neither remembered being separate. Callum opened his eyes. He was on his knees, head ringing, the taste of copper and starlight, which is not a real taste. But his brain was making new categories now, and it didn't care about human conventions, and something was different. He could hear, not sounds, frequencies, the station's hum, but underneath it, the fleet, a deep, resonant pulse, 17 ships breathing in harmony. He could feel it, in his bones, in the new architecture of his neural pathways, like a door had been opened inside his skull and someone had added a room. He looked at his hands, same bones, same skin, but the way he saw them, layered now, depth extending, as if the visible spectrum had quietly gained new colors without asking permission. What's happening to me, he knew the answer. The neural connection. It hadn't just linked them, it had changed them, permanently. He was not the same. He would never be the same. Salith withdrew from the nexus, slowly, her mantle fading, dim, depleted. She stood, because queens stand. Even when standing is the hardest thing in the universe. But her hands were shaking, and her eyes, those silver-layered eyes, were wet, not from pain, not from strain, from something she had never experienced before, something that had crossed the neural bridge and taken root in her. Uninvited, unstoppable, human emotion, in all its irrational, overwhelming, beautiful chaos. She was crying, and she didn't understand why. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice, for the first time, without layers, without harmonics, just a voice, small, confused, frightened. Callum stood, slowly, walked to her, and stood beside her, not touching, not explaining, just present. "That's what it feels like," he said gently, "when you're not alone anymore." Her ears lowered. Vithara, but different now, not heavier, shared. "It is overwhelming." "Yeah, and illogical. Completely. And it does not stop." "Nope." She looked at him, tears on an alien face, silver eyes reflecting a human who had become something more than human, and something in her expression, past the confusion, past the vulnerability, past the thousand calculations that had governed every moment of her life. Relief, the relief of finally, finally. not carrying everything alone. The treaty was signed on day 9, not with ceremony, not with speeches, with 2 signatures, and a handshake that Callum had to teach Salith, which took 3 attempts, because her hands were engineered for neural synchronization, not gripping. You squeeze with the fingers, not the entire forearm. This gesture is biomechanically absurd. Welcome to human ritual. Hargrove stood as witness. For the human side, his signature on the document alongside the Secretary General's transmitted approval. The old ambassador, who had believed in bridges, even when both sides were setting them on fire. Thalys stood as witness. For the Varanthi, not willingly, not happily, but present, because Salith had asked. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain and the crimson mantle of a man who had twisted loyalty into destruction, he could not refuse her. Not in this, not when she asked, not when she needed. And perhaps, Callum thought, perhaps that was its own kind of redemption. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the willingness to stand in the room where forgiveness might someday happen. Orlov was absent, transferred to Earth that morning, quietly, without court-martial, without spectacle. Hargrove had negotiated that, because the old soldier understood something the young ones didn't. That humiliation creates enemies, but quiet removal creates space for reflection, for the slow, private reckoning that happens when a man sits alone with the distance between who he thought he was and who he turned out to be. Callum didn't hate Orlov. That surprised him. He had expected to, had prepared for it. But standing in the chamber where the treaty was being signed, he found something else where the hatred should have been. Pity, maybe, or understanding. Orlov had been afraid, genuinely afraid, of a universe that had suddenly gotten bigger and stranger and less controllable. And fear, when it wears a uniform, looks like duty, sounds like patriotism, feels like the right thing, until it isn't. Marin signed as scientific advisor, her hands steady, her eyes red-rimmed. She had spent the previous night writing a 30-page report that detailed everything. Her involvement, her compromise, her choice to correct it. She submitted it to 3 separate oversight bodies, voluntarily. She would face consequences. She knew that. Reprimand, possibly suspension. The kind of professional scar that follows you into every room for the rest of your career. But she had made the calculation. A different one this time. The cost of silence versus the cost of truth. And she had chosen truth. Late. Imperfect, but chosen. Callum had read the report, all 30 pages, and at the end, in the margin, he had written one word, brave. She had looked at it for a long time and said nothing, which was the most honest thing she had said in days. They would rebuild the friendship, slowly, the way you rebuild anything that's been broken, not by pretending it never happened, but by building around the break. Letting it become part of the structure, letting the scar be visible. Because visible scars are honest. And honesty, as it turned out, was the only material strong enough to build anything that lasted. Later, after the signing, after the handshakes and the harmonic acknowledgments and the carefully worded statements transmitted to a planet that was still trying to process what had happened. Later, they stood together, Callum and Salith, at the viewport. The big one, the one that showed everything, Earth below, fleet above, and the space between, no longer empty, connected now, by signals invisible, by a frequency that 2 species had created together, in a moment of crisis, out of desperation, and trust. What happens now, he asked. Now, she said, we construct an alliance, not from fear, but from curiosity. And maybe fewer anatomical misunderstandings. That would be efficient. He smiled. Small, real, the kind of smile that comes after you've been through something that should have destroyed you, and didn't. Your initial statement, she said, after a moment, was crude, deeply, but it was honest, painfully. And honesty initiated this bond. He exhaled. Guess I owe my lack of impulse control an apology. It has become advantageous. You know what's funny, he said. I've spent my whole career studying language. the mechanics of communication, how words carry meaning across cultures, how to translate the untranslatable. He shook his head. And the most important thing I've ever said, the thing that changed everything, was the one sentence I didn't mean to say. Perhaps that is the lesson, she said, that the truest communication is not the planned kind. That's a terrifying philosophy for a diplomat. You are not a diplomat. I'm really not. And I am glad. He looked at her, really looked. Not at the queen, not at the sovereign, not at the bioorganic supercomputer with external indicators. At the person who had lost a world, saved a fleet, hidden a wound, shown it, and survived. You know, he said, on Earth there's a saying, first impressions matter. And ours, she asked. I thought about it. The chamber, the silence, the dropped stylus, the horror, the gold mantle, the word, amplitude, the laughter that followed, and everything after. Everything that had grown from the worst possible beginning into something that neither species could have predicted. Unforgettable, he said. A faint smile touched her lips. Not quite a smile, not entirely not a smile. The exact same expression from that first day, but different now because he could read it, because she was letting him. Yes, she agreed. Unforgettable. And below them, Earth turned, no longer alone in the universe. Above them, the fleet held, no longer drifting. And in between, two people who had no business being here, who had broken every rule and every expectation and every carefully constructed model of how first contact was supposed to go, stood together in shared orbit. 6 months later, Callum stood at the edge of two worlds, water lapping at his feet, an alien city humming behind her. The first Varanthi settlement had been established in the Pacific, not on land, in the water, grown from the same bioalloy as their ships. He visited weekly, his new frequencies making translation unnecessary. He could feel the settlement the way you feel a favorite song, not hearing it, knowing it. Salith met him at the boundary, her mantle brighter now, not just gold and blue, new colors, warm ones. She was. She had admitted once, more inefficient than before. But not less, she had added, more in every direction. I've been thinking about what you said, he told her, about leadership isolating. Yes, it doesn't have to. Are you offering to share the weight? I'm offering to stand next to you while you carry it. He paused, and occasionally say something stupid, to keep things balanced. Her ears tilted forward, attentive, amused. That is a significant commitment. The stupidity. I have reserves. A sound escaped her, harmonic, musical, warm, but layered underneath, barely audible, was something purely human. A giggle. She would deny it later. He would remind her, often, and somewhere above them. A station orbited, patched, scarred, held together by alien precision and human stubbornness. A monument to the fact that the worst first impression in the history of two civilizations had somehow become the foundation of their future. Below, an ocean that now held two kinds of life. Above, a sky that now held two kinds of hope. They were talking about putting up a plaque on the station to commemorate the moment it all began. The committee had been arguing about the wording for 3 months. Diplomats on both sides drafting and redrafting, consulting historians, consulting linguists, consulting each other in meetings that lasted hours and produced nothing. Callum had one suggestion. Here stood Dr. Callum Wren. He said the wrong thing. It turned out right. They were still debating.